Hello, Cybersecurity National Security Law class. Welcome to Lecture 3. In this class, we're going to talk about the international law of war and how the international law of war might map onto cyberspace. Well, when we're talking about this question of the international law of war, it raises the question of what is war? Now, we might think that the answer to that question is obvious, but as lawyers, of course, we want to think carefully about what the terms we're trying to use mean. And if you think about it a little bit, there are plenty of circumstances in which it might not be entirely clear what is war and what is some other kind of aggression or hostility. One place that theorists of war look to, and the international law of war looks to, is a 19th century Prussian general named von Clausewitz. So von Clausewitz, in a book on war, gave a definition of war that is still very famous and very widely used today. And here's Clausewitz's definition. So Clausewitz says war is an act of force to compel an enemy to do our will, but not merely an act of policy, but a true political instrument, a continuation of political intercourse carried on with other means. This statement of Clausewitz is often paraphrased as saying that war is politics by another means. So notice a few things in this definition that we can draw out. One is that war is violent, and we probably already know that. The other is that war is instrumental. If something is to be called war as opposed to some other sort of violence, it is pursuing some particular goal. And the third is that war is attributable to a political actor. To say that war is attributable to a political actor really refers to our discussion from the first class about what a nation state is and where nation states come from. So we're making a distinction here between violence by a private person, violence by a criminal organization, terroristic kind of violence, from violence that can be attributed to a political actor. Well, some theorists kind of looking at how Clausewitz thinks about war think about how we would map this onto various kinds of violence. And one thing that Clausewitz was concerned about was talking about the concept of total war. Now, Clausewitz is writing in the 19th century. He's a German thinker. He's heavily influenced by the philosopher Hegel, and Hegel is, very much of his time, kind of interested in the dynamics of the darkness of the human soul, so to speak, the tension within the human person, and the dialectics of what that brings out, the kind of contrasts and conflicts that brings out. And so in thinking about this, Clausewitz thinks about total war on the one hand, which is really pure violence, and about pure politics on the other hand, which is policy without violence. So you can kind of look at this graph up on the screen and say that there's total war, which is complete violence, there's pure politics, which is zero violence, but anywhere in between, there's some kind of mixture. And we can call various things in between as kinds of war. Clausewitz said that total war would drive policy out of office and rule by the laws of its own nature. So notice how Clausewitz here is sort of channeling that Hegelian force in the person, and then is kind of suggesting that a theory of war has to kind of account for that in the political domain. One way that Clausewitz did that is through what is now called the Clausewitz Trinity. So Clausewitz spoke of, number one, primordial violence, hatred, and enmity. Very, very Hegelian terms, right? Number two, the play of chance and probability. And number three, war's element of subordination to rational policy. So there's this dynamic of violence. There's this overlay on that of chance or probability, which in a sense begins to control or tame the violence or influence the violence. But third, kind of on top of that, is rational policy, is taking all of this and putting it into some kind of framework that puts it to some kind of purpose. Now, in contemporary military doctrine, people often talk of Clausewitz's Trinity as being the people, the army, and the government. And Clausewitz didn't quite talk about it that way, but in Clausewitz's writing you can see that he does associate the primordial violence aspect with the people, kind of the mass of the people. He does associate the play of chance and probability with the army. So whereas the mass of people have sort of untamed passions, an army, a disciplined army, begins to act in a certain space and to assess the chances of various things happening and the probabilities of various things happening and to discipline it. And then the element of subordination to rational policy he associates with the government. So on top of all this, there's a governing structure, a government that has some rational policy that is governing the conduct of the army, that is channeling kind of the passions of the people.